There are 10 things you need to know. Number 1. We rode across the Hudson at dawn. My friend William P. Van Ness signed on as my number 2. Hamilton arrived with his crew, Nathaniel Pendleton and the doctor that he knew. Number 3. I watched Hamilton examine the terrain. I wish I could tell you what was happening.
Welcome to February, and welcome to the first time I've showed you Hamilton since last year. I'm super excited to talk to you this week about the 12th Amendment, which was ratified in 1804. Do you know what else happened in 1804? Alexander Hamilton was killed in a duel. If the amendment had been passed sooner, he may have went on to be president. Or if the 12th Amendment was never ratified, we might currently be living under the President Joe Biden, Vice President Donald Trump administration. Are you intrigued yet? The 12th Amendment gets no respect, but it solved a major flaw in the Constitution. We've already talked about the fact that the people don't elect the president, the Electoral College does, right? It's not popular vote. However, under the original Constitution in Article 2, Section 2, it says, members shall meet in their respective states and vote by ballot for 2 persons. Under the original Constitution, there wasn't a separate vote for president and vice president. Instead, each elector voted for 2 people. The person with the majority of the votes became president, and then the second most amount of votes became vice president. That's probably something similar to what you might do in your academic clubs, right? Whoever gets the most votes is president, and whoever gets the second most votes is vice president. In theory, it makes sense, especially when you don't throw political parties into the mix. But we did not listen to George Washington, who warned us against political parties, and political parties got thrown into the mix. I actually may be able to find video of that farewell address from George Washington.
Teach them how to say goodbye.
George Washington's going home.
You and I.
No, but in his farewell address, he did warn against the dangers of people voting for the advantage of their political party versus the advantage of the nation. He said that it would be one of the most detrimental things to happen to our nation. He said specifically that it would foster a spirit of revenge and enable the rise of cunning, ambitious, and unprincipled men who would usurp for themselves the reins of government, destroying afterwards the very engines which have lifted them to unjust dominion. We didn't listen, and in fact, political parties had already begun to emerge. So let's take a look at the presidential elections of 1796 and 1800 and how the results ultimately led to the ratification of the 12th Amendment.
In 1796, the Federalist candidate, John Adams, came in first and was elected president. His running mate was Thomas Pinckney, the former governor of South Carolina. When the Electoral College cast their votes, however, too many Federalist electors withheld their second vote from Pinckney to make sure that he didn't tie with Adams, and that led to the Democratic-Republican candidate Thomas Jefferson becoming Adams' vice president instead of Pinckney.
Remember when I said if it wasn't for the 12th Amendment, we could have had Joe Biden as president and Donald Trump as vice president? This is what I meant. We had Thomas Jefferson as the vice president to John Adams, but they were from opposing political parties. You think campaigns are ugly now? A few years ago, I shared these quotes and I asked students to guess who said it, and a lot of them guessed that it was Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton talking about each other. But no, it was in the 1790s when Jefferson's supporters accused Adams of having a hideous hermaphroditical character, and Adams accused Jefferson of being a mean-spirited, low-lived fellow. Can't we all just get along? Let's look at the election of 1800.
And then in 1800, Jefferson and Burr both ran as Democratic Republicans with the expectation that Jefferson would be the president and Burr would be his vice president. For this to work, the Democratic Republican electors needed to cast the first of their 2 electoral votes for Jefferson. Then, to prevent a tie, one elector needed to withhold his second vote for Burr. However, no one remembered to withhold that second vote for Burr, and the result was a tie between Jefferson and Burr in the Electoral College. The election then went to the House of Representatives, where it took 6 days and 36 ballots before Jefferson was elected president and Burr vice president. Article 2, Section 1 had created a trap for the unwary, and it was so disastrous that I think the nation had no choice but to amend the Constitution to avoid that problem ever happening again. Shortly after the catastrophic election of 1800, the 12th Amendment was proposed by Congress and ratified by the states. The 12th Amendment fixes both the Adams-Jefferson problem and the Jefferson-Burr problem by requiring separate votes for president and vice president.
So the 12th Amendment does that by saying that presidential electors no longer just cast 2 votes and the highest vote getter is the president, but instead there's now 2 different ballots, one for the president, one for the vice president. How do I tell students to remember what the 12th Amendment did? It took it from 1 ballot to 2. 12. See?
Though everyone agreed that there was a problem with Article 2, Section 1, there was still a few who opposed the passage of the 12th Amendment, such as Gouverneur Morris of New York, who argued that electors should recognize the importance of giving both votes to men fit for the first office. Hamilton, however, demolished this argument with a single sentence, retorting, "One such fact as the late election of 1800 is worth 1,000 theories." The 12th Amendment isn't very controversial, but it did have a significant effect on the presidential election process. By correcting the technical defect of Article 2, Section 1, it has ensured that the disastrous elections of 1796 and 1800 have never seen an encore performance.
I mentioned earlier that if the 12th Amendment had been ratified sooner, then perhaps we would have had President Alexander Hamilton, or at the very least, maybe he wouldn't have been killed in a duel. Let me explain. I mentioned that the election of 1800 was a pretty controversial election and it ended in a tie, and the House of Representatives had to decide between Thomas Jefferson and Aaron Burr. Alexander Hamilton, here's where he became involved. He favored Jefferson over Burr, and so he convinced delegates in the House to vote for Jefferson over Burr because he thought Jefferson was the lesser of 2 evils. This made Burr very angry.
Jefferson has my vote. I never agreed with Jefferson once.
When Burr later ran for governor of New York and lost to someone who wasn't that well known, he thought there was only one person who could be to blame: Alexander Hamilton. Burr was angry that he had lost another election at the hands of Alexander Hamilton, and he heard Hamilton had been talking smack about him at a dinner party, so he challenged him to a duel, as they did in the 1800s. There are conflicting accounts on what happened, if Hamilton purposely missed a shot or if Burr hadn't really intended on killing Hamilton, but when it comes down to it, Burr hit Hamilton and Hamilton died the next day. The 12th Amendment, am I right? Anyway, before I start talking about this week's assignments, I did want to thank you for sharing with me some things that brought you joy last week. Some common themes I found were you all, or a lot of you, felt joy from YouTube videos, memes like me, your significant others, and I had a lot of comments about dogs and puppies. So quite a few of you either got a new dog, or your neighbor got a new dog, or you just enjoyed playing with your dog. So I know we're not seeing each other, but you guys have a lot in common. So thanks again for sharing that with me. So much like every other week, I do have another Edpuzzle that talks about what I just mentioned. This is by Hip Hughes again, which I know you're becoming familiar with. And I just want to let you know, the reason I like showing someone else talking about essentially the same topic is that I know that we all learn a little bit different, and sometimes someone else can explain it better. So we have Hip Hughes explaining the 12th Amendment, and that's really all we're going to do this week with the 12th Amendment. I think it truly is important and very impactful on our government, but rather than do a critical thinking question about it or a Google form about it, I wanted to kind of wrap up the Bill of Rights, because I do think the Bill of Rights is very important to know, and it's something that comes up every year in Supreme Court cases, and it's something that will affect your everyday life more than the 12th Amendment. So I am calling it a quiz because it does encompass information that we've covered. Well, we covered it last year, right? Starting in, I think, November. And so we're going to be going over not only the first 10 amendments to the Constitution, but how the Bill of Rights got added to the Constitution and who wanted to add it to the Constitution. So it's considered an open note quiz. I do provide, like often, a slideshow that you can use to help you to answer the questions. I recommend taking a look at that slideshow maybe before you open the Google form, and then use that slideshow, use your own research, use any notes you may have taken to complete this quiz. It is a little bit more lengthier than some of the Google Forms I've given you, but it's all in one section. So you can skip around without having to like go forward to a page and go back. So it's 25 questions. It's all on one page. And the slideshow really should help. Also, if you've been doing well all year and you have an understanding for the Bill of Rights, then I think you're going to do fine. But definitely take your time. I know you only have a 4-day week because you're meant to be off Friday, but I'm going to make this due Friday to give you an extra day since it is a quiz. As always, the Ed Puzzles are going to be due Wednesday night, and hopefully you are watching this one prior to the Hip Hughes Ed Puzzle and prior to taking that quiz. All right, make it a great week. Make it a great month. We are in February, and I will leave you off with potentially the last time I mentioned Hamilton this school year, but probably not.
As a less extreme you need to change course. A key endorsement might redeem you.
Who did you have in mind?
Don't laugh.
Who is it?
You used to work on the same staff. It might be nice